30 years of raising cattle. Not a single vet bill. Not one. While every rancher in the valley spent fortunes on antibiotics, vaccines, and emergency calls, one old man in the hills of Oregon spent zero. His neighbors called him crazy. His cattle looked nothing like theirs. Lean where theirs were massive. Horned where theirs were polled. Wild where theirs were docile. And when the worst winter in half a century hit that valley, when temperatures dropped to 20 below and the snow buried everything, something unthinkable happened. The modern cattle started dying. Hundreds of them, exposed, shivering, dropping dead from diseases their expensive genetics couldn't fight. But across the fence, on 80 acres of rocky, worthless hillside, a herd of ancient red cattle stood in the blizzard like it was a spring afternoon. Not one cough, not one lost calf, not $1 spent. The old man was already gone by then. He left the farm to his 28-year-old granddaughter, a woman with no ranching experience, no money, and no allies. What he left her was something far more valuable than land. He left her a bloodline, a secret locked in the DNA of those red cattle that powerful men would lie, cheat, and destroy lives to keep buried. What happened next is a story I almost didn't believe. Dust settled over the oak casket as Wren Calloway watched the final handful of dirt hit the wood. A hollow sound, like a door closing on a room you loved, but could never walk back into. Everett Calloway was gone, 83 years old, stubborn until his last breath, which, if you knew Everett, was exactly how he would have wanted it. No hospital, no machines, just his recliner, his dog at his feet, and the sound of cattle moving through the eastern pasture outside his bedroom window. The mourners were already pulling their coats tighter, buttoning up against the October wind that came screaming across the valley like it had somewhere better to be. A few neighbors muttered their condolences. A couple of old-timers shook Wren's hand without making eye contact. And then they were gone. All of them, climbing into trucks and sedans and disappearing down the gravel road like smoke. Wren stood alone at the grave, 28 years old, brown hair whipping across her face, hands shoved deep into the pockets of her grandfather's oversized wool coat because she hadn't thought to bring her own. Because she hadn't thought about a lot of things when she threw her Portland apartment keys on the counter 6 months ago and drove 3 hours east to take care of a dying man she loved more than anyone alive. She had been an accountant, a good one, the kind who spotted a decimal error in a 200-page spreadsheet the way a hawk spots a field mouse from 1,000 feet. She had a corner desk at a firm downtown, a steady paycheck, a life that made sense on paper. And she gave it up with one phone call. Everett's voice on the other end. Thin, fragile. Nothing like the booming baritone that used to shake the kitchen walls when he laughed. "Bertie," he said. That was his name for her, always had been. "I think it's time you came home." So she did. 6 months of feeding him soup he barely touched. 6 months of sitting on the porch with him in the evenings listening to the Callaway Reds lowing in the fading light. 6 months of pretending neither of them knew what was coming. And now the pretending was over. Wren looked out across the property from the hilltop cemetery. 80 acres of rocky, windswept, stubbornly beautiful Oregon hillside. The kind of land that looked worthless to anyone with a calculator and absolutely priceless to anyone with a soul. The Callaway Reds were visible from here, 37 head grazing along the western ridge, their russet coats glowing like embers against the gray autumn sky. Horns sweeping wide, heads low to the ground, completely unbothered by the wind that was making every human in the valley miserable. They were heritage cattle, descended from the original hardy stock that pioneers dragged across the plains 150 years ago. Lean, angular, built like athletes instead of bodybuilders. Thick, double-layered hides that could handle anything Oregon threw at them. They foraged on scrub brush no commercial cattle would touch. They calved alone in the middle of the night without a single human hand to help them. And in a world that sold livestock by the pound, they were considered a joke. Wren knew this. She had heard it her entire life. Every Thanksgiving when relatives visited, every time a neighbor leaned over the fence to shake his head, every time someone in town asked Everett why he didn't just sell those relics and buy some real cattle, Everett never answered. He would just smile. That quiet, infuriating, knowing smile, like he had a secret he wasn't ready to share. The funeral reception moved to the parish hall in town, a low-ceilinged room that smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. Folding tables covered in casserole dishes nobody was eating. Wren stood near the back wall, holding a paper cup she hadn't sipped from, wishing she could disappear into the wood paneling. That was when Dalton Mercer found her. She saw him coming, hard to miss, 6'4", 270 pounds stuffed into a custom-tailored charcoal suit that was fighting a losing battle against his gut. His face was permanently flushed. The kind of red that comes from too much whiskey, too much steak, and an absolute certainty that you are the most important person in any room you walk into. Dalton Mercer owned the neighboring property. If you could call 30,000 acres a property, it was a sprawling commercial feedlot and breeding operation. Thousands of genetically optimized Angus cattle lined up in metal pens, automated grain feeders running 24 hours a day, trucks hauling animals in and out like a factory assembly line. His operation bumped right up against Wren's fragile perimeter fence, and for 20 years Dalton Mercer had wanted that fence gone. "Wren," he said, stepping into her space with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, or at least never accepted it. "My deepest condolences. Everett was one of a kind." The smile he offered did not reach his eyes. It never did. Dalton Mercer's eyes were small and calculating, the color of wet cement, always measuring, always appraising, looking at people the way a butcher looks at a side of beef. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer." Dalton, please. He leaned closer. Cologne. Expensive. Overwhelming. Listen, I know this isn't the time, but I also know you're a practical woman. You've seen the market. You know those relic cows of his can't compete. They're eating grass you could be leasing to me. Wren tightened her grip on the paper cup. I'm prepared to offer you top dollar for the acreage, and I'll even haul those reds to the auction house for you. Save you the embarrassment. The farm isn't for sale. Mercer blinked. Just once. Then the smile came back, wider this time, the kind of smile that had teeth behind it. You can't run a ranch on nostalgia, sweetheart. My Angus put on 3 pounds a day. Your grandfather's animals are lucky to manage one. You'll be bankrupt by spring. Then I'll be bankrupt by spring. And when you are, my offer drops by 20%. Think about that tonight. When you're sitting alone in that drafty farmhouse, with a stack of bills and nobody coming to help you. He walked away, slow, deliberate, leaving behind that lingering cloud of cologne and the sour aftertaste of a threat disguised as friendly advice. Wren watched him go, and she hated herself for the tiny voice in the back of her head, whispering that he might not be entirely wrong. She drove back to the farm as the sun was setting. The house was dark, empty in a way it had never been before. Everett's boots were still by the door, his coffee mug still on the counter, unwashed. She couldn't bring herself to wash it. Not yet. Grit was waiting on the porch, her grandfather's blue heeler, 13 years old, gray muzzle, one ear that permanently flopped sideways from a run-in with the barbed wire fence when he was a pup. He pressed his warm body against Wren's leg as she unlocked the door. Just us now, boy, she said. The dog looked up at her with eyes that somehow understood everything. Wren made herself a cup of tea she wouldn't finish and sat down at her grandfather's desk. The desk was a massive slab of hand-planed pine, scarred and stained with decades of use. And on top of it, stacked neatly, precisely, were Everett Calloway's ledgers, heavy leather-bound books, the old-fashioned kind. No computer spreadsheets for Everett. He kept his records in sharp, slanted, meticulous handwriting that hadn't changed in 40 years. Every penny accounted for. Every expense documented. Wren opened the most recent one. The columns marched down the pages in perfect order. Feed costs, fencing materials, fuel, property tax, equipment repairs. The profit margins were razor thin, just enough to keep the lights on and the tractor running. She almost closed the book right there, almost accepted the grim arithmetic, and started mentally composing the phone call to Dalton Mercer. Except her eyes caught something, or rather, they caught the absence of something. The way you notice a missing tooth in a smile. It wasn't what was there, it was what wasn't. Wren frowned, pulled the ledger closer to the lamp. ran her finger down the expense columns one more time. Feed, fencing, fuel, property tax, insurance. And then a column with a neatly printed header. Veterinary expenses, blank. Not small, not modest, blank, zero, nothing. An entire year of raising 37 head of cattle and not a single entry for antibiotics, dewormers, hormone implants, emergency calls, vaccinations, nothing. Wren pulled the previous year's ledger. Same thing, zero. She went back 5 years, zero. 10 years, zero. She climbed up on a chair and pulled down the dusty boxes from the top shelf of the closet. Ledgers from 20 years ago, from when she was a child running through these pastures in rubber boots. Zero. 30 years. 30 years of raising cattle in the harsh Oregon hills. And Everett Calloway had not spent one single dime on veterinary care. In the commercial beef industry, that was impossible. Flatly, medically, financially impossible. A farmer like Dalton Mercer spent hundreds of thousands of dollars a year keeping his genetically fragile animals alive. Antibiotics for respiratory infections. Hormones for growth, emergency C-sections for calves too large to be born naturally because their parents had been bred for size instead of function. The vet bills alone could bankrupt a mid-size operation in a bad year, and Everett had paid zero. Wren sat back in the chair, staring at those empty columns, her accountant brain buzzing like a shorted wire. This wasn't luck. Luck didn't last 30 years. This was something else entirely. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at that desk until the windows turned gray with dawn, reading, comparing, cross-referencing, building a picture from the numbers the way she used to build financial profiles for her clients in Portland. And the picture that emerged was extraordinary. The Callaway Reds didn't just have low vet bills. They didn't get sick. Period. No respiratory infections. No digestive issues. No calving complications. In 3 decades of detailed records, not a single animal lost to disease. Not one. Whatever Everett had been protecting out there on that hillside, it wasn't just a sentimental heirloom. It was something the modern agricultural industry had completely, systematically, bred out of existence. Morning came cold and bright. Wren drove her grandfather's battered pickup truck into town for fencing supplies. The truck was a 1994 Ford. Rust around the wheel wells. A crack across the windshield that Everett had been meaning to fix for 11 years. It smelled like hay and motor oil and an old dog. At the feed store counter, she ran into Dr. Preston Voss. Voss was the most prominent large animal veterinarian in the county. Maybe the only one who mattered. He ran a gleaming modern clinic on the south end of town. Corporate-sponsored, fully equipped, and he spent roughly 90% of his billable hours on Dalton Mercer's payroll. He was a good-looking man. She'd give him that. Early 50s, silver temples, a white lab coat that was always somehow spotless. hands that were manicured despite supposedly spending his days inside barns. "Ren, my sincere condolences." His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that made you instinctively check for your wallet. "I heard you're trying to keep the old place going. Admirable." "Thank you. If you're keeping livestock, we really should get you on a herd health plan." He adjusted his collar, smiled the way dentists smile before telling you something expensive. "Those reds of yours have never been vaccinated. Not once. It's highly irresponsible. Frankly, they're a ticking time bomb of disease just waiting to spread through the commercial herds in this valley." Wren set her roll of wire on the counter, looked at him, took a breath. "Dr. Voss, my grandfather's records show he hasn't lost a single calf to disease in 30 years. Can Dalton Mercer say the same about his herd?" The smooth smile cracked. Just for a second, like a mask slipping sideways. "Modern agriculture requires modern medicine, Ms. Calloway. And my grandfather's cattle seem to require neither." Voss's jaw tightened. The professional warmth evaporated so fast you could practically hear it hiss. "Your grandfather got lucky. Luck runs out, especially when an unvaccinated herd is sitting right next to the largest breeding operation in the county. When your animals start choking on pneumonia this winter, my emergency call rate doubles." He turned and walked out, stiff-backed, offended. Wren paid for her wire and followed him into the parking lot. She watched his white clinic truck pull away. Pristine, expensive, probably cost more than everything she owned combined. Something about the encounter bothered her. Not just his arrogance, not just the barely concealed threat. Something else. Something in the way he talked about her cattle. Not with contempt exactly, with fear. Like a man standing next to a bomb he couldn't defuse. She drove home thinking about it, turning it over in her mind the way she used to turn over a suspicious expense report. Something didn't add up. A veterinarian who made his living treating sick cattle should have been thrilled to have an unvaccinated herd nearby. More potential patients, more billable hours, more money. Unless the Calloway Reds threatened something more valuable to Preston Voss than a few office visits. Back at the farm, Wren checked on the herd. They were grazing the western ridge. Calm, steady, those big rust-colored bodies moving through the dry autumn grass like they had been doing it for a century and a half. Because they had. Their ancestors walked this same ground, ate this same scrub brush, breathed this same mountain air. She stood at the fence watching them until the light started to fade. Grit sat beside her, patient, quiet, his gray muzzle resting on his paws. "What did you know, Grandpa?" she whispered. The wind didn't answer, but the cattle lifted their heads, all of them, at the same time. 37 pairs of dark, intelligent eyes looking directly at her, as if to say, he knew everything, and now it's your turn. That evening, Wren did something she had been avoiding since the funeral. She went through Everett's personal belongings. The closet in his bedroom was sparse. a few flannel shirts, work boots, a dress jacket he probably hadn't worn in 20 years. On the top shelf behind a cigar box full of old coins, she found a metal lockbox. It wasn't locked. Everett trusted his locks the way he trusted his cattle, just enough to keep the casual intruders out. The serious ones would get in regardless. Inside the lockbox, there were 3 things. A photograph, black and white, faded at the edges, dated 1952 in pencil on the back. It showed a man Wren had only seen in other photographs. Everett's father, Josiah Calloway, tall, gaunt, standing beside a small herd of red cattle in front of this very barn. The cattle looked identical to the ones grazing outside right now. Same russet coats, same sweeping horns, same watchful eyes. On the bottom of the photograph in handwriting that was not Everett's, older, more formal, someone had written, "Keep the blood. Never cross them. The reason is in the land. The reason is in the land." Wren stared at the words. Read them again. A 3rd time. They meant nothing to her, and yet they felt heavy, charged. Like a locked door she didn't have the key to, yet. The 2nd item was an envelope, sealed, yellowed with age, on the front in Everett's handwriting. For Wren. When you're ready. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter, handwritten on lined notebook paper, dated 2 years ago, when Everett was still strong enough to hold a pen steady. Birdie. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you stayed. I knew you would. You're the only one who ever understood why this place matters. The herd is the legacy, not the land, not the house, the blood. Protect it. There are people who will try to take it, some with money, some with badges, some with needles. I made a mistake years ago. I tried to share what we have. I thought spreading the bloodline would protect it. I was wrong. It only painted a target. The Mercers destroyed every animal I gave away. Every single one. Marjorie was the last to fall. I never forgave myself for that. There is a woman named Marjorie Fenn. End of Tabletop Road past the dead orchard. She knows things about this herd that I never told you. Things I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry I waited. Old men think they have more time than they do. Keep the blood. Keep the land. And when they come for it. The letter stopped. Mid-sentence. The pen had trailed off the edge of the paper, like a hand losing its grip. Wren sat on the edge of her grandfather's bed, holding the unfinished letter, reading that last broken line over and over. When they come for it. When, not if. He knew. He always knew they would come. The 3rd item in the lockbox was a single page, torn from a larger document. the kind of heavy paper used for official reports. It was a lab printout dated 1987 from the Oregon State University Agricultural Research Center. Most of the text was technical, dense with scientific terminology Wren couldn't parse. But 3 lines were circled in red ink. Anomalous immune markers present in all subjects. Natural resistance to bovine respiratory pathogens significantly exceeds commercial baselines. Recommend comprehensive genetic study. Funding pending. Someone, probably Everett, had written in the margin. Declined. Too dangerous. They'll take the herd. Wren held the torn page to the light. The bottom half was missing. Ripped clean. Whatever conclusions that study had reached, whatever recommendations had been made, gone, declined, too dangerous. Her grandfather had known since 1987, possibly longer. He knew the Callaway Reds carried something extraordinary in their DNA. Some natural genetic armor against the diseases that devastated commercial cattle, and instead of publishing it, profiting from it, sharing it with the world, he buried it because he was afraid that the moment the industry learned what his cattle were worth, they wouldn't study them. They would take them. Wren carefully placed the letter, the photograph, and the torn lab page back into the lockbox. She closed it gently, like closing a coffin. Then she sat in the dark for a very long time. 2 days later, Wren drove to the end of Tabletop Road. The road was barely a road. Gravel turning to dirt, turning to mud, turning to 2 tire ruts through knee-high dead grass. Past an abandoned apple orchard with trees so old and twisted they looked like arthritic hands reaching out of the ground. At the end of the road sat a small house, wood-sided, paint peeling, a porch that sagged on one end like a tired smile, smoke curling from a crooked chimney. And on that porch, sitting in a rocking chair wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, was Marjorie Fenn, 74 years old, silver hair pulled back in a braid that hung to her waist, a face carved by weather and time into something that was simultaneously soft and absolutely unbreakable. She had blue eyes, pale, almost transparent, the kind of eyes that had seen everything and decided to keep watching anyway. "You're Everett's girl," Marjorie said before Wren had even closed the truck door. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Took you longer than I expected. I figured you'd be here the day after the funeral." She nodded toward the second rocking chair. "Sit down. I just made coffee. It's terrible, but it's hot." The coffee was indeed terrible, and the best cup Wren had tasted in months. They sat in silence for a while, rocking, watching the wind move through the dead orchard. 2 women separated by 46 years with absolutely nothing and absolutely everything in common. "He told me about you," Wren finally said, "in a letter. I imagine he told you a lot of things in that letter." "He told me you lost your herd." Marjorie stopped rocking. Her pale eyes went somewhere far away. 15 years away. I didn't lose them, child. They were taken. She told the story simply, without self-pity, without drama, which somehow made it worse. Marjorie Fenn had raised heritage cattle. Not Callaway Reds, but a similar bloodline. Hardy, self-sufficient, passed down through her husband's family for generations. When her husband passed, she kept the operation going alone. 60 years old, widowed, running 70 head of cattle on 120 acres with nothing but her own 2 hands and a border collie named Dutch. Dalton Mercer wanted her land. She refused. So Mercer did what Mercer always did. He filed complaints, health code violations, environmental citations. He hired lawyers to challenge her property boundaries. He leaned on the county tax assessor to reappraise her land at 3 times its value, tripling her tax bill overnight. I fought for 2 years, Marjorie said. Spent every penny I had on lawyers. And then his father, Theodore, that was before Dalton ran things, Theodore went to the bank. My bank, the only bank in the county, told them my operation was a liability. My loan got called in 30 days. She paused, sipped her terrible coffee. I had to sell the herd at auction, 63 head, below market price because Mercer made sure no legitimate buyer would bid. His people bought every single animal, and within a month every one of them was gone. Shipped to a processing plant in Idaho, not bred, not studied, not preserved, just ground into hamburger meat and erased from the earth. Wren felt something cold settle in her stomach. Grandpa tried to help you. Your grandfather stood in that auction house and bid on my cattle with money he didn't have. Mercer's people outbid him on every lot. Everett came to my house that night, sat in that chair you're sitting in, and cried. Only time in 40 years I ever saw that man cry. The wind picked up. The dead apple trees groaned. He never forgave himself, Marjorie continued. And I spent the next 15 years telling him it wasn't his fault. But Everett Callaway was not a man who let himself off the hook easily. Wren thought about the letter, the trail of ink running off the page, a hand losing its grip, a man running out of time to say the things that mattered. Marjorie, what did my grandfather know about the Callaway Reds? He had a lab report from 1987. Something about immune markers. He declined the study, said it was too dangerous. Marjorie set down her coffee cup, folded her hands, looked at Wren with those transparent blue eyes. Your grandfather knew that his cattle carried something in their blood that the pharmaceutical industry would kill to control. And I don't mean that as a figure of speech. She explained it in plain terms, the way a woman who has lived on the land her whole life explains things, without jargon, without pretension. The Callaway Reds had never been crossbred with commercial stock. Not once, not in 150 years. They were a closed genetic line shaped entirely by natural selection on this specific piece of harsh Oregon landscape. The weak ones died. The strong ones bred, generation after generation after generation. No shortcuts, no interventions. And over time, that relentless natural pressure had produced something remarkable. an immune system that modern cattle had lost entirely. Bred right out of them, sacrificed on the altar of faster growth and bigger muscles and more meat per animal. The commercial cattle industry spends billions of dollars a year on antibiotics and vaccines, Marjorie said. Billions. And there's a man like Preston Voss at the center of every operation getting rich off the sickness. If someone proved that a heritage bloodline could resist those diseases naturally without drugs, without intervention, it wouldn't just embarrass the industry. It would threaten the revenue stream of every pharmaceutical company, every corporate veterinarian, and every feedlot operator who depends on sick animals to justify his overhead. Including Dalton Mercer. Especially Dalton Mercer. Wren stared at the dead orchard, at the twisted trees that had stopped producing fruit years ago, but refused to fall down. "There's something else," Marjorie said, and her voice changed, dropped lower. "Careful. Something your grandfather asked me to tell you, but only when the time was right." "What?" "It's about your mother." The air left Wren's lungs, just gone, like someone had punched a hole in the bottom of a bucket. Her mother, Lenora Calloway, the woman Wren had spent 21 years trying not to think about. Lenora left when Wren was 7. That was the story Wren had always known. The only story anyone ever told her. Mom left. She's not coming back. Grandpa's here now. Eat your dinner. No explanation. No forwarding address. No birthday cards. No phone calls. Nothing. A mother-shaped hole in the fabric of her life that she had learned to walk around the way you learn to walk around a broken step. You don't fix it. You just stop looking at it. Your mother didn't just leave, Marjorie said quietly. It was more complicated than that. Wren's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs to make them stop. Lenora hated this farm, hated it with everything she had. The isolation, the poverty, the endless work. She wanted to sell the property to Theodore Mercer and take you to Portland. Start over. Give you a life she thought you deserved. And Grandpa said no. Your grandfather said no. And he meant it. The herd was everything to him. More than the money. More than the comfort. Even more than keeping his daughter happy. And Lenora couldn't forgive that. She saw it as him choosing cattle over his own family. So she left.
She left, but not because she didn't love you, Wren. She left because she couldn't stand watching you grow up in what she saw as a prison. She thought if she left, Everett would eventually sell. Follow her to Portland with you. Start fresh. He didn't. No, he didn't.
Wren's jaw was clenched so tight her teeth ached. 21 years of believing her mother had simply abandoned her. 21 years of filling that silence with the worst possible explanation. She didn't want me. She didn't care. I wasn't enough. And now this. A version of the story that was somehow worse because it wasn't simple. Because it didn't have a villain. Just two stubborn people who loved the same child and couldn't agree on what that love required. Did she ever try to come back? Marjorie hesitated. A long pause, the kind of pause that holds something heavy inside it. That's a story for another day, child. You've had enough for one afternoon. Wren wanted to push, wanted to grab the old woman by the shoulders and shake the rest of the story out of her. But she looked at Marjorie's face, at the careful way she held her coffee cup, at the weight behind those pale blue eyes, and she understood. Some truths need to be given in pieces, not because the listener is weak, but because the truth itself is too large to carry all at once. She drove home in silence, Grit riding shotgun with his head out the window. The Callaway Reds were silhouetted against the sunset as she pulled up the driveway. Dark red shapes against a burning orange sky. Standing on their hillside the way they had always stood. Patient, enduring, rooted to the land like the oak trees that sheltered them. Wren sat in the truck for a long time after she turned off the engine, holding the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Her grandfather had protected a secret worth millions. Her mother had walked away from her because of a fight over this land. A powerful man next door wanted to erase everything the Callaway family had built. And a smooth-talking veterinarian was circling the property like a vulture waiting for something to die. She was 28, alone, broke, and she was standing in the middle of something that was so much bigger than an old man's cattle ranch. When they come for it, they were coming. She could feel it the way you feel a storm before you see it. A change in the pressure, a stillness in the air. Something gathering force just beyond the horizon. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. Official letterhead, State of Oregon Department of Agriculture, addressed to Wren Callaway property owner and livestock operator. The language was dense, bureaucratic, full of section numbers and regulatory citations that would have made her eyes glaze over if she hadn't spent 5 years reading legal documents for a living. But the core message was simple. A formal complaint had been filed by Dr. Preston Voss, DVM, citing the Callaway livestock operation as a potential biosecurity threat to the surrounding agricultural community. Due to the documented absence of any vaccination or veterinary health program, the department was requiring a full biosecurity review. Wren had 30 days to submit to a comprehensive herd health inspection. Failure to comply would result in mandatory quarantine and possible forced liquidation of the herd. Possible forced liquidation. Kill them. They meant kill them. Dress it up in as much bureaucratic language as you want. The bottom line was the same. Let us in, or we destroy your cattle. Wren read the letter 3 times. Then she called the livestock lawyer in Portland, whose number Marjorie had given her. The lawyer was a woman named Constance Draper. Sharp, expensive, and brutally honest. They can do this, Constance said. If a licensed veterinarian files a sworn biosecurity complaint, the state has the authority to mandate an inspection. If you refuse, they'll get a court order. If the inspection finds any evidence of contagious disease, and believe me, they'll be looking hard, they can order a cull. My cattle aren't sick. That may not matter. The inspection itself costs thousands. Blood panels, lab work, state veterinary fees, and if Voss is involved in the process, which he likely will be, he can recommend additional testing that drives the cost even higher. They're not trying to find disease, Wren. They're trying to bankrupt you. Same playbook they used on Marjorie. Wren hung up, sat at the kitchen table, stared at the official letter with its embossed seal and its polite death sentence. 30 days. And outside the window, the first clouds of the season were building over the Cascade Ridge. Dark, heavy, bruised purple at the edges. The old-timers in town were already talking about it, calling it the Siberian Express, a brutal winter storm system barreling down from the Arctic that hadn't been seen in this valley in 50 years. The storm was coming, and so was everything else. Wren walked out onto the porch. Grit followed her. The wind was already picking up, carrying the smell of snow from 100 miles away. She looked at her cattle. They had moved to the eastern pasture, clustered near the ancient oak trees. Their heads were up, nostrils flared, smelling the same wind she was smelling. But they weren't afraid. They had survived 150 years of Oregon winters. They had survived droughts and floods and blizzards and predators and every single attempt by the modern world to replace them with something faster and fatter and more profitable. They were still here. And so was she. Wren folded the state letter, put it in the lockbox next to her grandfather's unfinished words, pulled on her work gloves, and walked out into the gathering cold to check the fence line. Because that was what Callaway women did. They didn't run. They didn't sell. They put on their boots and walked toward the storm. The storm came on a Tuesday. Not the kind of storm Wren had ever seen before. Not the gentle Portland rain she had grown up complaining about. Not even the heavy mountain snows that occasionally shut down the valley for a day or two. This was something else entirely. The Siberian Express dropped out of the Arctic like a hammer. Within 6 hours, the temperature plummeted from a damp 42 degrees to 20 below zero. The wind screamed down off the Cascades at 50 miles per hour. And the snow came sideways, then horizontal, then everywhere at once. By Wednesday morning, the valley was buried under 3 feet of solid white. By Friday, it was 4. By the following Tuesday, the locals had stopped checking. There was no point. The snow wasn't going anywhere. Wren learned what it meant to truly work. Her hands cracked and bled inside her gloves. Her back ached in places she didn't know had muscles. Every morning before sunrise, she was out at the water trough with a sledgehammer, breaking through ice that had refrozen into a solid foot-thick block overnight. Every afternoon, she was hauling hay bales out to the ridges, the tractor barely able to find traction. the diesel engine groaning against the cold. She lost 10 pounds in the first 2 weeks. She didn't notice. She slept 4 hours a night. She didn't notice that either. What she did notice, what she could not stop noticing, was the cattle. The Callaway Reds were thriving. While Wren shivered inside 3 layers of insulated coveralls, the cattle stood on the ridges with steam rising off their backs like they were sunbathing. They didn't huddle. They didn't shiver. They used their heavy hooves to break through 3 feet of snow to reach the dormant prairie grass beneath. The calves played, actually played, chasing each other through the drifts with the kind of bounding energy that should have been impossible in conditions that were killing animals all across the valley. Not a single Callaway Red dropped weight. Not one cow shivered. Not one calf got sick. Across the barbed wire fence, less than 100 yards away, it was a different world. Dalton Mercer's operation was dying. Wren could see it from her kitchen window. The massive feedlot pens stretched across the lowland to the south. And in those pens, thousands of Angus cattle were collapsing. The heavily muscled commercial animals, bred for nothing but rapid weight gain, had no natural defenses against the cold. Their hides were thin, their immune systems weak, their fat reserves engineered for the slaughterhouse, not for survival. They stood clustered together in shivering masses, coughing, wheezing, the sound of bovine respiratory disease. What the ranchers called shipping fever rolled across the fence line every morning, a wet, hacking chorus that grew louder by the day. Dr. Preston Voss's white veterinary clinic truck became a permanent fixture on Mercer's property. Lights flashing morning, noon, night. Wren watched it through her kitchen curtains, counting 12 trips on Tuesday, 15 on Wednesday, 18 on Thursday. And still the cattle died. She would find their bodies pressed against her fence line some mornings, animals that had walked as close to the Callaway property as they could get before collapsing, as if they had sensed something different over here, something safer, and tried to reach it with the last of their strength. She had to keep grit inside. The smell was too much for him. One bitterly cold afternoon in late January, Wren was patching a section of fence that had snapped under the weight of the snow. Her wire stretchers frozen to her gloves, her breath rising in white clouds. She heard the crunch of heavy boots, looked up. Dalton Mercer was standing on the other side of the wire. He looked terrible. The man who had cornered her at the funeral with his expensive suit and his predatory confidence was gone. In his place stood a haggard figure, face gray. The whites of his eyes pink from exhaustion. Bags so dark beneath them they looked like bruises. His massive frame seemed smaller somehow, like the cold had shrunk him. "You need to move your animals away from the fence line." His voice was hoarse, cracking at the edges. Wren paused, rested her hands on the wire stretchers. My cattle are on my property. They're carrying something. My cattle aren't sick. Then how do you explain it? His voice rose, sharp, desperate. I've lost 300 head this month, 300 Callaway. Voss says it's a mutated respiratory strain. My animals are dropping dead, and yours are just standing there, staring at us. They have to be asymptomatic carriers. Or your cattle are dying because you bred all the immunity out of them. Don't lecture me about cattle, little girl. Don't call me little girl, Mr. Mercer. He struck the wooden fence post with his gloved fist. Hard. The post shuddered. Voss is filing a state agricultural emergency. He's going to get an injunction, mandatory quarantine on your property. And when the state finds out you've never vaccinated those animals, they'll order a cull. You'll lose everything. You keep saying that. I keep still being here. His face purpled. He stepped closer to the barbed wire. So close, she could smell him. Sweat. Whiskey. A sour edge of fear underneath. You think you're tough. You think your grandfather's stubbornness is going to save you. Everett was a fool. A sentimental old fool who couldn't see when the world had moved on. You're going to follow him into the ground, and I'm going to plow this property under and put a feedlot where his house used to stand. Wren did not look away. Get off my fence, Mr. Mercer. He stood there for another long moment, wanting to say more, wanting to do more. But there was nothing else to do. The fence was a fence. The law was the law. And for now, both of them were holding. He turned and stomped back through the snow to his idling truck. Wren watched him go, and the second his taillights disappeared down the gravel road, her hands started shaking. Not from the cold. She made it back to the farmhouse before she let herself cry. Sat at the kitchen table with Grit's head on her knee and let the panic come out of her in dry, exhausted sobs. Her grandfather was dead. Her mother was a ghost. Her bank account was running on fumes, and the most powerful man in the county had just promised to grind her family's legacy into the dirt. She picked up the phone, called Constance Draper. They're filing for a state quarantine, she said, the words coming out flat, drained. How do you know? He just told me, threatened me right at the fence. Constance was quiet for a moment. Then, Wren, I need you to listen carefully. If Voss files a formal biosecurity complaint and the state agrees to inspect, you have very few options. The blood draws alone will cost you $12,000 to $15,000. Lab work on top of that. State veterinary fees. If they find any pathogen, even something common and harmless, they have grounds for further action. And Voss will be the one interpreting the results. Then I'm finished. Not finished, but fighting from a bad angle. Is there any way you can get an independent veterinarian on your property? Someone outside of Voss's network. Someone who could document the health of your herd before the state inspection. In this valley, Voss is the only large animal vet within 90 miles. Then you need to widen your network. University extension programs, state research centers, anyone who isn't on Mercer's payroll. Find me an outside expert and I can fight this. Wren hung up, stared at the phone. University extension programs, state research centers. She remembered the torn lab report in her grandfather's lockbox. 1987. Oregon State University Agricultural Research Center. Someone there had been interested in the Callaway Reds before. Someone there had funded a study. Someone there might still remember. That night, Wren sat at her grandfather's old desk and began digging through the internet on her laptop. The connection was slow. The Wi-Fi router was older than her car. But she searched and searched, and eventually she found a name. Dr. Leland Thorne, Ph.D., Oregon State University, veterinary epidemiologist, specializing in livestock pathogen resistance and genetic immunity studies. He had published 43 peer-reviewed papers in the last decade. He had testified in front of Congress about pharmaceutical overreach in commercial agriculture. He had been a vocal critic of corporate veterinary monopolies for 20 years, and his university bio included a personal email address. Wren wrote the email at 3 a.m. She didn't sleep that night either. She got an answer back the next afternoon. Dr. Thorne was interested. Very interested. He had reviewed the redacted 1987 study many years ago and had always wondered what happened to the herd. He would be willing to come out, personally, conduct independent testing, document everything, but he was traveling for 2 weeks. Conference circuit. He couldn't come until the 3rd week of February. That was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks. Wren stared at the email. 3 weeks felt like 3 years. She closed the laptop, walked outside, stood in the driveway with the wind tearing at her coat, looked at her cattle on the ridge. 3 weeks. She could survive 3 weeks. She did not yet know that her enemies would not give her 3 days. 2 nights later, the call came at midnight. Wren was already in bed, half asleep. Grit was on the rug at the foot of her bed. The phone rang. She picked it up, her voice thick with sleep. Hello. Is this Wren Callaway? A woman's voice, soft, older, tentative. Yes. My name is Patricia Voss. I'm Preston's wife. Wren sat up, wide awake. How did you get this number? It's in the local directory. Listen to me, please. I don't have much time. He's in the shower. I have to talk fast. Wren swung her legs out of bed, pressed the phone harder against her ear. I'm listening. I think my husband is going to do something terrible. The line went silent for a moment, then a sharp intake of breath. Like the woman was working up the courage to keep going. He brings work home, files, phone calls. He doesn't think I pay attention. But I've been married to him for 31 years, and I know when he's planning something. There's a young technician at the clinic, Harlan Birch. They've been meeting in the lab after hours, working on something. Preston has been on the phone with Dalton Mercer 4 times in the past week. They're talking about your cattle, about your trough. My water trough. He used the word seeding. He said tonight or tomorrow night. I don't know which one. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do. I'm a coward. I should have said something years ago, but Mrs. Voss. He's coming. I have to go. Please, please be ready. The line went dead. Wren sat on the edge of her bed, the phone still pressed against her ear, the wind outside howling against the windows. Seeding. He used the word seeding. She put the phone down, stood up, walked to the closet, took her grandfather's 12-gauge shotgun off the top shelf, checked the chamber, loaded shells into the magazine with hands that were steady now, not shaking, not anymore. Grit was already at the door, ears forward, hackles up, whining low in his throat. He could feel it too. Whatever was coming. She didn't sleep, not for 1 minute. She sat by the kitchen window in the dark, the shotgun across her lap, a thermos of black coffee on the table beside her, watching the moonlit fields, listening to the wind and the cattle and her own heartbeat. The first night, nothing happened. She sat there until dawn. Then she fed the cattle, came back inside, slept for 2 hours on the couch, woke up, drank coffee, and waited for the next night. The second night, just after 1 a.m, Grit started barking. Not his ordinary bark, not the bark that announced a deer in the orchard or a raccoon at the garbage can. This was something deeper, older, the kind of bark a dog only makes when something is wrong in a way human beings cannot smell. Wren was already moving. Boots, flashlight, shotgun. She slipped out the back door. The cold hit her like a wall. 20 below. The kind of cold that froze the moisture in your nostrils on the first breath. The moon was a thin, curved blade in a black sky. Just enough light to see by. Grit was bristling at the gate. She put a hand on his head, steadied him, pointed toward the eastern pasture, whispered, "Find." The dog ghosted ahead of her into the dark, silent now, stalking. She followed him up the rise toward the oak trees where the cattle bedded down at night. The snow crunched under her boots, each step impossibly loud in her ears. She crested the ridge, and she saw him, a figure, heavyset, bundled in a thick canvas coat, climbing carefully over the barbed wire fence from Mercer's property, carrying something, a metal bucket, the kind a vet might use, hauling it toward Wren's main water trough, the big concrete one, the one the entire herd drank from twice a day. She raised the flashlight, pumped the action on the shotgun. The metallic clack of the slide racking back echoed across the frozen field like a thunderclap. The figure froze. "Stop right there." Her voice came out hard and clean. No fear in it, just command. She painted him with the beam of the flashlight. He threw a hand up to shield his eyes, dropped the bucket. A thick, milky yellow liquid spilled into the snow, steamed for a half second, then froze. The smell hit her. Foul, rotten, sour yeast and decay. She recognized him. Harlan Birch, 20-something, veterinary technician. Worked at Voss's clinic for 3 years. Nervous-looking kid. Always twitching. Always sweating. "Don't shoot, ma'am. Please, don't shoot." "Step away from the bucket, Harlan." He stumbled backward. His boot slipped on the ice. He went down hard. Got up. Hands raised so high they were shaking. She advanced, slow, steady. The flashlight pinned on his face. Tears were freezing on his cheeks. Actual tears. The kid was terrified. "What is it?" "What?" "What's in the bucket, Harlan?" "I can't. He'll kill me. He'll..." "What is in the bucket?" He broke, like a glass dropped on tile. "It's a live culture. Voss grew it in the incubator at the clinic. He told me to dump it in your trough. Said your cows needed to test positive for something, so the state would order a cull, he said. He said you'd never know. He said it would just look like they got sick from being unvaccinated." Wren stared at the yellow stains spreading in the snow. Biological sabotage. It was not greed. It was not stupidity. It was not even cruelty in the ordinary sense. It was a calculated, cold, deliberate attempt to murder her grandfather's bloodline, to erase 150 years of natural selection in a single night, with a bucket and a lie. She felt her own heartbeat slow down. Strange. She would have expected it to race, but it didn't. It went quiet, steady, like the inside of a clock. "Empty your pockets." "Ma'am, please. I have a daughter. I can't go to jail." "Empty your pockets." He fumbled with shaking gloves, pulled out his wallet, threw it onto the snow. She crouched, picked it up, slid out his driver's license, his clinic ID card, pocketed both. "On your knees. Please. On your knees, Harlan." He dropped. She kept the shotgun trained on him with one hand, reached into her coat pocket with the other, pulled out an evidence bag, a leftover from her old accounting days. Plastic, sealable, the kind she used to use for receipts. She scooped a fist-sized chunk of the contaminated yellow snow into the bag, sealed it. Then she grabbed the bucket with her free hand. Some of the broth still sloshed inside. She sealed that too. Inside, a second larger bag. "Now listen to me very carefully, Harlan Birch. I have your name. I have your face. I have your clinic identification. I have a sample of the bacterial culture you tried to dump in my water supply. And I have a witness. She gestured at the dog. Grit was crouched 10 feet behind her, lips pulled back, teeth bright in the flashlight beam. I am going to let you walk out of here. Tonight. Right now. But if you ever set foot on this property again, if you ever come within a mile of my fence line again, I will not call the sheriff. I will not call the state. I will end this myself. He nodded, frantic. Now run! He ran. He scrambled back over the barbed wire, tore a long gash in his canvas coat, half fell, got up, sprinted across the snow toward Mercer's property, disappeared into the dark. Wren stood there, alone, the wind cutting through her layers, the yellow stain in the snow steaming slightly in the flashlight beam. She did not go back to sleep that night. She did 3 things instead. First, she walked back to the farmhouse, carried the sealed bag of contaminated snow and the sealed bucket, placed them carefully in the deep freezer in the basement, right between a venison roast from last fall and a bag of frozen strawberries from her grandfather's garden. Second, she went up to the bedroom, opened the lockbox, pulled out her grandfather's unfinished letter, read those last broken words one more time. When they come for it, they had come. Third, she picked up the phone and called Dr. Leland Thorne. She didn't care that it was 3 a.m. She didn't care that he was supposed to be at a conference. She let it ring and ring and ring. He picked up on the 8th ring, voice thick with sleep. "This is Thorne." "Dr. Thorne, this is Wren Calloway from Oregon, the Calloway Reds. I emailed you last week." Yes, of course. What time is it? Are you all right?" "No, I am not all right. I just caught a veterinary technician trying to dump a live biological culture into my cattle's water trough." The silence on the other end of the line was very, very long. When he finally spoke again, his voice was wide awake, sharp, crystal clear. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." She told him. The funeral, the land grab, the state letter, Patricia Voss's phone call, the figure in the snow, the bucket, the confession, the evidence in her freezer. When she was finished, Dr. Leland Thorne said something that changed everything. "Wren, what you just witnessed and prevented is a federal crime. Biological sabotage of an agricultural facility falls under the agro-terrorism statute. This is not a local issue. This is not even a state issue. This is FBI jurisdiction. I am leaving for Oregon at first light. I will bring portable PCR testing equipment. I will bring 2 state troopers as security. And I will personally call the United States Department of Agriculture Special Investigations Unit on my way down. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "Until I arrive, you are to lock every door. You are to stay armed. You are not to let anyone onto your property. Not the sheriff, not a deputy, Not the State Department of Agriculture. Not even your own attorney. Nobody, until I am physically there. Is that clear? Yes. Wren. Yes. You are not alone in this anymore. She hung up, set the phone down on the kitchen counter, stared at her own reflection in the dark window. Her face was thinner than she remembered, sharper at the cheekbones. Her eyes were different too, harder, older. The eyes of someone who had stopped asking permission. She thought about her grandfather, about the unfinished letter trailing off the page. She thought about her mother, Lenora, 21 years gone. She thought about Marjorie Fenn, 74 years old, rocking in her chair at the end of Tabletop Road, holding 15 years of stories no one else wanted to hear. She thought about the Callaway Reds, asleep in the oak grove, their thick coats puffed against the cold, completely unaware that someone had just tried to murder every single one of them in their sleep. She would not sleep, not until the sun came up. Dawn arrived hard and bright. Light reflected off the snow with a brutal glare that hurt her eyes. She had just stepped out onto the porch with a fresh thermos of coffee when she heard the engines, multiple engines, coming up the long gravel driveway. She lifted the shotgun from where it was leaning against the doorframe, held it loose, not aimed, just visible. The convoy crested the rise, leading the procession. Dalton Mercer's black luxury truck, mud spattered, engine growling. Behind it, Preston Voss's white mobile veterinary clinic. Behind those, 2 white government vehicles bearing the official seal of the Oregon Department of Agriculture. They had come, sooner than Thorne would arrive, sooner than she had planned for. She stood on her porch, coffee in one hand, shotgun resting against the doorframe, grit pressed warm against her left leg. The vehicles stopped 20 feet from her front steps. Doors began opening. Dalton Mercer stepped out first. He was smiling. The terrible, exhausted gray of the previous afternoon was gone. In its place was the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had finally won. Preston Voss climbed out of the second vehicle. White lab coat, manicured hands. That same calm, professional smile he had used at the feed store. Except now there was a twist of triumph behind it. From the government vehicles emerged 2 men in heavy state-issued parkas. The taller one carried a leather briefcase. He stepped forward, flashed a badge. Ms. Callaway, I am Director Hargrove with the State Department of Agriculture. We have received an emergency sworn affidavit from Dr. Voss here, citing your herd as exhibiting severe symptoms of an undocumented biological contagion. Given the active die-off at the neighboring Mercer facility, we have a warrant to immediately quarantine your property, draw blood from your entire herd, and begin cull protocols as indicated. Wren took a long, slow sip of her coffee, looked at Voss. Emergency sworn affidavit? That's interesting. Ms. Callaway, because I checked my herd an hour ago, not a single cough, Not one runny nose. It's almost as if the contagion you tried to plant last night didn't take. Voss's smile did not change, not visibly, but she saw it, a tiny tightening at the corner of his mouth, a microsecond of confusion. Then he recovered. Director Hargrove. The woman is delusional, clearly in denial about the biosecurity threat she represents. I strongly recommend we proceed with the blood draws immediately. Nobody touches my cattle. You don't have a choice, little girl. Dalton Mercer's voice. Loud. Triumphant. We have the law on our side. Hargrove, tell your people to cut that gate chain right now. Director Hargrove stepped forward, looked apologetic but unmoved.
Ms. Calloway, I am sorry. I genuinely am. But we have a court order. I'm going to need you to step aside. Wren looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked past all of them. Past Mercer, past Voss, past the 2 state employees, past the convoy of vehicles, down toward the bottom of her driveway, where it met the county road, where 3 more vehicles had just pulled up. Silent. No sirens. But she could see the light bars. 2 Oregon State Police cruisers, and between them, a white university vehicle with the Oregon State University seal on the side. The driver's door of the university vehicle opened. A tall man in his 60s stepped out. White hair, long coat, wire-rimmed glasses. He was carrying a silver metallic case. Wren took another sip of her coffee. Hold that thought, Director Hargrove. She set the coffee down on the porch railing, looked at Dalton Mercer, and smiled. For the first time in months.
I think you'd better look behind you. The line of vehicles at the bottom of her driveway began moving. Slow, deliberate, crunching up through the snow toward the house. Mercer turned around. So did Voss. And the look that crossed Preston Voss's face when he saw who was stepping out of that university vehicle. When he recognized the man and the silver case and the 2 armed state troopers flanking him, was a thing Wren would remember for the rest of her life. It was the look of a man who suddenly understood that the trap he had spent 6 months building had just snapped shut on his own foot. Dr. Leland Thorne walked up the snow-covered driveway with the unhurried pace of a man who knew exactly what he was about to do. He climbed the porch steps, stood beside Wren, did not look at Mercer, did not look at Voss, looked only at Director Hargrove. Good morning, Director. Dr. Thorne. Hargrove blinked. What are you doing here? Stopping a crime. Thorne turned, slowly, faced Voss. Dr. Voss, my name is Dr. Leland Thorne. I am a veterinary epidemiologist with Oregon State University. Ms. Calloway called me at 3 o'clock this morning. She had just stopped your employee Harlan Birch from contaminating her water trough with the cultured biological pathogen. I have his sworn confession in this case.
along with the portable PCR analyzer that I will be using in the next 10 minutes to confirm the genetic match between the sample Ms. Calloway preserved and the bacterial strain currently devastating Mr. Mercer's commercial herd. The silence on the porch was absolute. Wren could hear nothing but the wind in the oak trees up on the eastern ridge, and the distant, low sound of cattle moving through deep snow. Preston Voss had gone very, very still. Dalton Mercer was staring at his veterinarian. The triumph drained out of his face like water down a sink, replaced by something that was not anger. Not yet. Something more dangerous than anger. It was the look of a man who realized he had just walked into the wrong room with the wrong people, and there was no way back out. Wren reached down, picked up her coffee, took a long, slow sip. Behind her, the door to her grandfather's farmhouse stood open. The lockbox waited inside on the kitchen table, with the unfinished letter, the 1952 photograph, the torn 1987 lab report, and the answer to a question her family had been carrying for 150 years. Dr. Leland Thorne opened the silver case right there on the hood of Dalton Mercer's luxury truck. The portable PCR analyzer was the size of a shoebox. Sleek, black, expensive. It hummed to life with a soft electronic chirp as he plugged in the field battery. Wren handed him the frozen evidence bag. The yellow stain of the bacterial broth was visible even through the layers of plastic. Thorne nodded once, set up the sample tray, loaded a small swab from the contaminated snow, began the analysis. The machine started running. A red light, a green light, a progress bar slowly filling on a tiny digital screen. Nobody spoke. Director Hargrove stood 10 feet away, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, his professional confidence completely gone. His face was the gray of cold concrete. He kept glancing at Voss, then at Mercer, then at the floor, like a man who had been invited to a dinner party and had only just realized the host was poisoning everyone. Preston Voss had taken a half-step backward toward his veterinary truck. The smooth professional veneer was crumbling in real time. His silver hair was suddenly disheveled. His manicured hand kept reaching for the truck door handle and then stopping, then reaching again, as if he were trying to remember the exact moment he had decided to ruin his own life. One of the state troopers shifted his weight. The leather of his duty belt creaked. Voss flinched. The trooper did not move again. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to keep Voss rooted to the snow. Dalton Mercer was the only one still talking.
This is a setup. This entire thing is a setup. That woman is unstable. She lives alone out here with 37 cows and a dog. Of course she's making up stories. Hargrove, look at me. We have a court order. We have a warrant. Cut the gate. Get the blood samples. Mr. Mercer? Cut the gate, Hargrove. Mr. Mercer, please be quiet. The PCR machine chirped. The progress bar hit 100%. A printout slid out of the side of the analyzer. Thorne picked it up. Read it,
held it up so Director Hargrove could see it too.
Confirmed.
The sample Miss Calloway preserved last night contains a high-concentration laboratory-cultured bacterial strain. The markers indicate artificial cultivation, not a natural infection. This was grown in a controlled environment, with laboratory equipment, by someone with veterinary expertise and access to a clinical incubator. Thorne lowered the paper, looked at Voss.
And the genetic signature of this strain, Director Hargrove, matches the exact pathogen currently killing animals at the Mercer feedlot.
Mercer's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish on a dock.
What does that mean?
It means Mr. Mercer. Thorne's voice was steady, almost gentle. That the man you have been paying to keep your cattle alive has been the one making them sick from the beginning. He cultured this bacterial strain in his clinic, released it into your feedlot to inflate his veterinary bills, and then he tried to plant the same pathogen on Ms. Calloway's property to frame her herd as the source of the outbreak. He has been playing both sides of this war, Mr. Mercer, and he has been profiting from your dying animals. The silence that followed was not silence. It was a sound, a specific sound. The sound of a man's entire understanding of his own world breaking apart in real time. Dalton Mercer turned slowly toward Preston Voss. Voss was already shaking his head. Dalton, no. He's lying. He's trying to confuse you. How many head have I lost this winter? Dalton, how many? That's not... How many cattle have I buried, Preston?
643.
The number came out automatically. Reflex. The bookkeeper part of Voss's brain spitting out the answer before the strategic part could stop it. The wind picked up. Snow lifted off the ridge and swirled around their boots. Mercer's voice dropped to a whisper. And how much did you bill me for each one of them before they died? Voss said nothing. How much, Preston? Nothing. It was Director Hargrove who finally spoke, quietly, almost sadly, like a man closing a heavy book. Troopers, take Dr. Voss into custody. Preston Voss did not run. He did not fight. He did not even argue. He just looked at his veterinary truck one last time. The clinic logo on the side. His name in white lettering. 20 years of professional life. And then he held his wrists out for the cuffs. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking shut was the loudest sound in the valley. They led him down the driveway, walked him past Mercer without a word, loaded him into the back of the trooper cruiser, closed the door. That should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it, because Dalton Mercer was not Preston Voss. Mercer had something Voss did not have. He had money. He had lawyers on retainer in Portland. He had political connections that stretched all the way to Salem. And he had 30 years of experience making problems disappear. Mercer recovered fast. The shock of the betrayal was real. But under the shock, the survival instinct was already moving. Wren watched it happen in real time, watched his eyes refocus, his shoulders square, his jaw set. The man was a businessman before he was anything else, and he understood faster than anyone else in that driveway that the situation could still be salvaged. He turned to Director Hargrove, voice suddenly calm, reasonable. Director, I am as shocked as you are. This man has worked for me for 2 decades. I trusted him like a brother. If he has been doing what Dr. Thorne is claiming, then I am a victim here, not a perpetrator. I will fully cooperate with any investigation. That is appreciated, Mr. Mercer. In the meantime, I would like to point out that the methods by which the so-called evidence was collected last night are deeply suspect. Ms. Calloway held a young man at gunpoint on her property in the middle of the night. She took his identification without authorization. She extracted what she calls a confession under threat of lethal force. None of this would be admissible in any court I'm familiar with. Director Hargrove blinked. That was when Wren felt it, the first cold finger of doubt sliding into her chest. Because she knew, even as Mercer was saying the words, that he was right, or at least right enough to make a problem. She had stood in the snow at 1 a.m. with a loaded shotgun. She had taken Harlan Birch's wallet. She had threatened him. She had been completely justified. Morally, practically, by any reasonable standard of self-defense on private property. But the law was not always reasonable. The law was a long, expensive maze, and Dalton Mercer had the money to make her walk through every inch of it. She glanced at Thorne. He gave her the smallest nod, as if to say, "He's not wrong, but we are still not finished." 2 days later, Constance Draper called. They filed. What did they file? Everything. They filed for an emergency motion to suppress all evidence gathered on the night in question. They filed a civil suit against you for aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and theft of personal property. They filed a press release that has already been picked up by the Portland Tribune and 3 regional ag papers. What press release? You don't want to know. Tell me what the press release says, Constance. A sigh on the other end of the line. It paints you as an unstable young woman radicalized by her grandfather's anti-modern agriculture views. It quotes Mercer expressing concern for your mental health. It mentions you live alone with no nearby family. It refers to the Calloway Reds as, quote, an unvaccinated relic herd. It implies that you have hostage-like control over Harlan Birch's confession through intimidation. And it concludes by suggesting that the entire incident may have been staged to deflect from the legitimate biosecurity threat your operation poses. Wren sat down at the kitchen table. She had been making coffee. The kettle was whistling. She did not get up to take it off the burner. Constance, what happens now? The county judge here is named Robert Halsey. He has been on Mercer's contributor list for 15 years. 2 of his grandchildren work summers at the Mercer feedlot. He is going to grant the motion to suppress. I am almost certain of it. Which means the evidence from the night Harlan Birch was caught becomes inadmissible. Which means the bacterial sample, the wallet, the confession, all of it, gone. What about Thorne? What about the PCR results? Those still stand, but without the chain of evidence tying it to Voss directly, all we have is a contaminated snow sample. Mercer's lawyers will argue it could have come from anywhere, even from someone trying to frame Voss. The narrative gets muddier, and Mercer is very, very good at muddy narratives. The kettle screamed. Wren got up, walked to the stove, turned it off, poured the water into a mug she did not want to drink from. What do? We need new evidence, independent evidence, something Mercer cannot touch, something that proves a pattern, not just one incident. He's done this before. Of course he has. Men like Mercer don't wake up one morning and decide to commit bioterrorism. There is always a trail, people he has hurt, documents that exist somewhere. We need to find them, and we need to find people willing to talk. Wren stared at the coffee in the mug. Might know somebody. She drove to Marjorie Finn's house that afternoon. The dead orchard looked different in winter. Naked branches, stripped of even the memory of leaves. The road was packed snow now. The truck slid sideways twice on the way down. Marjorie opened the door before Wren had reached the porch. I heard you arrested Voss. He arrested himself. I just held the door open. And Mercer. Mercer is rich Marjorie. The old woman nodded slowly, as if this was the part she had been expecting all along. Come inside. There's something I want to show you. The interior of Marjorie's house was small, warm, cluttered in the specific way of a woman who had outlived everyone she loved and had no reason to organize anything for visitors. Books on every horizontal surface, a wood stove crackling in the corner, a black cat sleeping in a basket of yarn. Marjorie led her down a narrow hallway to a back bedroom that had clearly not been used as a bedroom in years. It was a storage room now. Boxes stacked from floor to ceiling, filing cabinets along one wall, a small wooden desk pressed against the window. Marjorie walked directly to a green metal filing cabinet, pulled open the bottom drawer, took out a thick manila accordion folder, set it on the desk. I've been waiting 15 years to show this to somebody. What is it?
This is every piece of paper I kept from my battle with the Mercers.
Wren opened the folder. The contents were extraordinary. Court filings, tax assessments, bank correspondence, photographs of livestock, veterinary records, letters from the county, letters to the county, newspaper clippings carefully cut and labeled with dates. There must have been 400 pages, maybe more. But it was the second folder that made Wren go still. Tucked inside the first folder, like a second skin, was another envelope. This one was smaller, older, sealed with a piece of brittle Scotch tape. Marjorie picked it up, held it for a moment, as if she were saying goodbye to something.
There were 4 other families before me. 4 families who tried to keep heritage herds. The Wexlers, the Brommel sisters, the Stoddard family, and the Killings. All gone. All of them lost their land between 1989 and 2003. All of them were broken by exactly the same playbook the Mercers used on me. Bank pressure, inflated tax assessments, manufactured code violations, discredited in the local papers. Are any of them still alive? 2. Mrs. Brommel is in a retirement community in Bend. Adelaide Stoddard is in a memory care facility in Eugene. Her mind comes and goes, but on her good days, she remembers everything.
Wren looked at the folder. At 15 years of meticulously preserved injustice. At an old woman who had lost her cattle, her husband's legacy, her place in the community, and who had still spent every Sunday afternoon for 15 years filing receipts and clipping newspaper articles. Because she knew that one day somebody, maybe somebody not yet born when she lost her herd, would walk into her living room and need this folder. Marjorie, why didn't you do anything with this before now? Because, child, there was no one to give it to. Everett was the last one with a heritage herd standing. If I had handed this folder to him while he was still alive, Mercer would have known. Mercer would have moved against him, and we would have lost the last bloodline. You were waiting for me.
I was waiting for whoever came after Everett. I am very glad it was you. Wren took the folder, heavy as a brick in her arms.
Marjorie walked her to the door, pulled her coat tight against the cold. There is one more thing, Wren.
What?
The old woman hesitated, looked out across the dead orchard, looked down at her hands, looked back up. Inside the folder, there is a smaller envelope, marked with your name. I want you to open it tonight, alone. Not at the lawyer's office, not in front of anyone. Alone. Why? Because it is not evidence. It is something else. Wren did not ask anything more. She drove home with the folder on the passenger seat. She made it to her own driveway before she had to pull over and breathe. The interior of the truck was warm. The heater rattling. Outside, the world was white and silent. She unbuckled her seatbelt, reached over, lifted out the small envelope. Her name was written on the front, in her mother's handwriting. She had not seen her mother's handwriting in 21 years, but she recognized it instantly. The way the W of Wren looped slightly to the left. The careful loop of the N. She remembered birthday cards from before her mother left, carefully labeled in that same script. She opened it. A letter, 3-page, yellowed at the edges. To Daddy, I know you won't write back. You haven't written back to any of my letters. But I keep writing because I don't know how else to live with what I've done.
I am sober now, almost 3 years. I work in a small bookstore in Portland. I share an apartment with 2 other women. I do not have a lot of things, but I have a kettle and a small balcony with a chair. And I am beginning to remember who I was before I started running. I left because I could not see how to stay. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you to understand. I am only asking you to know.
Ren is 6 years old now.
I don't know what she remembers. I don't know what you have told her. I would not blame you if you have told her the worst version of the truth. It is mostly true. I cannot come back yet. I am not ready. I would only hurt her again. But I think about her every single day. The way she chewed her thumbnail when she was tired. The way she sang to herself in the bath. The little crooked smile.
When she is older, Daddy, when she is grown, when she is strong enough to choose whether she wants to know me, please give her this letter. Tell her I never stopped. Tell her the leaving was about me, not about her. Tell her I am sorry for the years she will spend believing it was anything else. Tell her I love her. I love her. I love her. Lenora.
There was a phone number at the bottom of the page, half faded with age, followed by a note in different ink, added later in slightly shaky handwriting. Probably Marjorie's. I called this number a few years ago to confirm it was still her. She answered. I hung up. I did not know what I would say. Ren sat in the truck for a long time, the heater rattling, the folder of evidence on the seat beside her, the letter from her mother in her lap. She did not cry. Not yet.
Crying would come later. Crying would come in a kitchen at midnight a week from now. Crying would come on the phone. Crying would come in pieces and waves, and at the strangest possible moments, brushing her teeth, loading hay, watching a movie she did not even like, but not now. Now there was work to do. She put the letter inside her coat, right against her heart, drove the rest of the way home. The federal case took 90 days to come together. Constance Draper worked it from her Portland office. Dr. Leland Thorne worked it from the university. The United States Department of Agriculture sent 2 investigators out from the Sacramento Regional Office to interview Marjorie Fenn, the surviving members of the Wexler and Stoddard families, and 17 current and former employees of the Mercer operation. The pattern was undeniable. 3 decades of coordinated economic warfare against small heritage farmers. Falsified tax appraisals filed through county connections. Manipulated bank loans through a regional financial institution where Theodore Mercer had served on the board until his death. Bribed code inspectors. Targeted media leaks. And underneath all of it, a long pattern of veterinary fraud and unauthorized growth hormone use across the Mercer feedlot that violated more than a dozen state and federal regulations. The local county judge, Robert Halsey, did indeed grant Mercer's motion to suppress the evidence from the night Harlan Birch was caught. It did not matter. The federal prosecutor in Portland filed under different statutes, different jurisdiction. Halsey's ruling had no authority over the federal case. Mercer's expensive lawyers tried to delay, tried to consolidate, tried to move venues. Nothing worked. Preston Voss turned state's evidence in week 6. He named names, he provided dates, he produced internal clinic records that showed Dalton Mercer had personally authorized the culturing of the bacterial strain. Mercer had wanted Wren's herd destroyed to clear the way for an expansion he had been planning for 15 years. The expansion would have rezoned the entire eastern half of the valley for industrial agriculture. The Callaway property was the last holdout standing in the way. Voss admitted everything: the bacterial sabotage, the kickback scheme with the feedlot suppliers, the hormone violations, the coordinated harassment of Marjorie Fenn and the other heritage farmers. In exchange for his cooperation, the federal prosecutor agreed to reduce his charges from 23 years to 14. Dalton Mercer was offered no such deal. He was indicted on 27 federal counts, including conspiracy to commit agricultural sabotage, wire fraud, tax fraud, bribery of public officials, witness intimidation, and a federal antitrust charge for the systematic destruction of competing small farms. His corporate sponsors abandoned him in a single week. The bank he had ridden to power called in all of his outstanding loans. His feedlot was placed under federal receivership pending the outcome of the trial. He posted his maximum bail, hired a Washington, D.C. defense team, and went home to wait. Wren did not see him during any of this. He never came back to the fence line, never tried to call her, never sent a lawyer to her property. But once, just once, she drove past the entrance to his property on her way to town, and she saw him. He was standing alone in the snow at the gate of his foreclosed feedlot. No suit, no truck, no employees, just a man in a heavy coat staring at the empty pens where 643 cattle had died for nothing. He looked smaller, not exhausted the way he had looked at the fence in January, smaller in some more permanent way, like something inside him had collapsed and not gotten back up. She did not slow down. She did not honk. She did not do anything at all. She just kept driving. He never spoke to her again. Spring came slowly that year. The snow took 6 weeks to fully melt. The pastures emerged in patches. First, the south-facing slopes, then the eastern ridges, then finally the deep hollows where the snow held longest. By late April, the valley was green again, lush, wet, smelling of rain and new grass and possibility. Calving season began on the Callaway property without a single complication. As always, 31 healthy calves dropped over 6 weeks. Russet coats, sturdy legs, bright eyes. Their mothers stood guard over them with the same calm, patient watchfulness their ancestors had brought across the Oregon Trail in 1848. Dr. Leland Thorne came back in late April with a full university research team. They tested every animal, blood draws, genetic sequencing, comprehensive immune system analysis.
The results were what Everett Callaway had spent his entire life protecting.
The Callaway Reds carried a unique heritable immune variant, now formally identified by the Oregon State Research Team and given a designation in the Bovine Genetics Database. The variant produced an extraordinary natural resistance to the entire family of respiratory pathogens that devastated commercial cattle operations. It was traceable through the maternal line all the way back to the original pioneer stock brought into the territory in the 1840s. It had survived the bottleneck of westward migration, the pressure of harsh Oregon weather, a century and a half of marginal forage and minimal human intervention.
It could not be replicated in a laboratory. It was the product of 150 years of a specific landscape doing exactly what it did, killing the weak, sparing the strong, forging an immune system that no pharmaceutical company could compete with. Because they could not patent the wind or the snow, or the steep ravines, or the scrub brush that had made these cattle what they were. The reason was in the land. Just like Josiah Callaway had written on the back of that 1952 photograph.
Oregon State University offered Wren a multi-year research grant, significant funding, enough to pay off the property tax burden, enough to invest in better fencing, enough to expand the herd, and critically enough to bid on the foreclosed Mercer property when it went up for federal auction. She won the auction in May. She bought 500 acres of what had once been the largest commercial feedlot in the county for less than what Mercer had spent on his Washington, D.C. defense team. The metal pens were demolished within a month. The earth was tilled and reseeded with native grasses. The automated grain bins were sold for scrap. By the time the new grass took root, the land had begun to forget what had been done to it. Wren did not keep all of it for herself. She made 3 phone calls that summer. The first was to Marjorie Fenn. "I have a calf for you," Wren said. "Child. 2 calves, actually, a heifer and a young bull. From this year's drop. They're yours, Marjorie. I'm putting them on your property next week. You don't owe me anything. You never have." A long silence on the line, the kind of silence that holds a whole life in it. "Everett's calves," Marjorie whispered. "They were always yours." The second call was to a phone number she had been carrying inside her coat pocket since February. A number on a yellowed letter. A number she had picked up and put down and picked up again, maybe 100 times. She dialed it on a Tuesday morning, while she was sitting on her grandfather's porch, watching the cattle graze, with grit at her feet. The phone rang 4 times. A woman picked up. "Hello?" The voice was older than Wren remembered. softer, a little hoarse, but unmistakable. 21 years could not erase the voice of the woman who had once sung you to sleep. Mom. Silence. Then a small broken inhale on the other end of the line. The kind of sound a person makes when they have been waiting for a phone call for half their adult life and never let themselves believe it might actually come.
Ren.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm not. I don't know what I'm calling to say. I'm not ready. I don't know if I will ever be ready. But Marjorie gave me the letter, the one you wrote in 1998, and I wanted you to know that I read it. I wanted you to know that I am alive, and the farm is alive, and I wanted to know anything. I wanted to know if you would write to me. Just letters. For now. No visits, no phone calls after this one. Just letters. Until I can figure out what I want. Lenora Calloway. The mother who had walked out of a kitchen 21 years ago. Wept softly on the other end of the line.
I will write to you every week for the rest of my life, if that is what you want. It's a start. Yeah. I have to go now, Mom. I know. I'll send you my address. Ren. What? Thank you. She hung up, sat on the porch, the phone still in her hand, watched the cattle graze, did not cry, did not laugh, did something more complicated than either.
She just breathed. The third call she made was to a woman named Sandra Wexler, whose mother had lost a heritage herd in 1991. To Theodore Mercer, to the same playbook, to the same long, quiet war. Sandra, this is Ren Calloway. I have a calf for you, if you want it. The summer was the best summer Ren had ever known. She was up before dawn every morning, out in the pastures with Grit and the cattle. The mornings smelled like wet grass and dust and warm hides. She learned to mend fences with one hand. She learned to read the weather by watching the way the cattle turned their ears. She learned which calf was going to be a good mother in 3 years, just by the way she walked at 3 weeks old. She was 28 years old. She had a college degree she would never use again, a grandfather she would never see again, a mother she might or might not let back into her life, a community that had laughed at her and then stayed silent during the trial, and now stopped her in the grocery store to say things they should have said 6 months ago. She let them say it. She did not need their apologies, but she did not refuse them either. The valley had been wounded too. Mercer had hurt more than just the heritage farmers. He had built an entire local economy on his dying cattle. When his operation collapsed, hundreds of people had lost jobs. The wounds were going to take time. She was not interested in deepening them. She was interested in healing the land, the bloodline, The future. On a warm evening in late June, Wren sat on the porch with her grandfather's leather-bound ledger open across her lap. The new ledger, not the old one. The new one she had started keeping the day after the federal indictment came down. The columns marched down the page the way Everett had taught her. Feed, fencing, fuel, property tax, insurance. And the last column, veterinary expenses. She picked up her grandfather's old fountain pen, the one he had been using for 40 years, the one that had drawn the final trailing line of his unfinished letter. She uncapped it, and in the column marked veterinary expenses for the full operational year now drawing to a close. She wrote in careful black ink the same single answer her grandfather had written every year for 30 years. 0. She capped the pen, closed the ledger, set it down beside her on the porch. Grit pressed his old gray muzzle into her knee. The Callaway Reds were on the eastern ridge again, silhouetted against the orange Oregon sky, their calves running and bucking in the long grass, their mothers patient and watchful, the bull standing at the high point of the ridge with his head up, surveying his small kingdom, the way his ancestors had stood on this same hill in 1848, and in 1879, and in 1923, and in 1952, and in 1987, and now in this moment too. Wren closed her eyes, felt the warm wind on her face, heard the cattle, heard the dog, heard the porch creak under her, heard her own heartbeat. Her grandfather's voice came back to her then. Not a memory. Something older. Something carried in the bones. The herd is the legacy. Not the land. Not the house. The blood. Protect it. She had. She would. The woman on the porch, with the ledger closed beside her, and the dog at her feet, and the cattle on the ridge, was finally home. If you enjoyed this story of resilience, of holding the line, when the world wants you to fold, of standing up for the quiet wisdom of those who came before us, please consider giving this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone in your life who needs to hear that the old ways are not always wrong. And subscribe to this channel for more stories of courage, community, and the kind of strength that does not announce itself, but simply shows up. Day after day, season after season, the way the cattle on that Oregon ridge have shown up for 150 years. Thank you for watching.